What's up, Bulldogs? All right, in this video, I actually have a YouTuber that I've been following for a while. I've been watching some of his videos. Actually, I think the first time I heard about Frank is when I saw Vegan Gains make these videos, condemning him, like getting in this war with him. And I'm not the hugest fan of Vegan Gains myself. I think the guy's he's a little bit mental, but I don't know. Hopefully, he doesn't come and kill me. But really wanted to introduce you guys to Frank Tufano, who actually does a really good content on all kinds of fitness and health stuff. And he's actually a carnivore. He does a carnivore diet, and just mostly just eats meat. But I've really enjoyed his videos because he's got a lot of science behind what he's saying. He seems to be very reasonable about it, and it shows, right? You look at Frank, you can see, I don't think I've seen someone that has a better like skin tone and hair and everything, and so you can, that was one of the things I was like, okay, you hear people talking about stuff, but when you see it, then you're like, okay, well, he must have something, some truth behind this. So welcome, Frank.
Thanks, John. That was a great intro. So I've been making videos on YouTube for about 3 years now on mostly health and diet related stuff. And when the carnivore diet started becoming popular, my diet fit under those requirements. So I kind of pigeonholed myself there a little bit. But I also talk about things like optimizing your water, sun exposure, pollutions in the environment, anything pertaining to your overall health and how you can improve it. Really, the main focus is educating people on nutrient density, the importance of high quality animal foods in the diet, and how they can become, the healthiest versions of themselves. Vegan Gains isn't, the nicest guy to talk to, but unfortunately for him, if you bring up someone that's very likable and charismatic, when people do end up coming to my channel, as much as a vegan that they were, as much as they hated me, I tend to convert a lot of people.
Yeah, I would believe that, because I feel like the way that you go about things is very stoic. It's not like personal attacks. You're not getting angry and upset. It's like, I feel like a lot of the vegans, which I don't have any problem with vegans in general, but I feel like a lot of the tactics that they use are shaming tactics, that they have a lot of rage, like, it's very, I guess they're very connected, right? The kind of the very far liberal left and the vegan for the same type of thing. And it's just not it's not something that appeals. It's very hard to convince people when your only way of convincing is through emotion instead of rational. So
yeah, it doesn't really work on me because I kind of have two mindsets. One is educating people, and unfortunately for the vegans, I've done thousands and thousands of hours on research and reading all these studies and understanding, specifically the bioavailability of nutrients in plant foods versus animal foods. So if they want to talk from that perspective, they're kind of batting out of their league. And my other mindset is just humor and having fun and making fun of people. And us Italians are, pretty wacky. So I found that they haven't been too successful against dismantling me to some degree, but when I involve myself with these vegans, with these crazy people, it's definitely, something that if I could have gone back and known what would have happened, I might have reconsidered it.
Yeah. Who knows? I mean, it's in my mind, like, it's any publicity is good, right? It's like, if you're out there and, people are always, no matter what you're doing, like, I guess I would say, like, if you're doing something of substantial worth, like, people, you're going to get attacked, right? If you do something that's just mundane and you try to please everyone and not ruffle any feathers, then no one's going to care. So
yeah, I'm all for the publicity. It's just, I would have changed my mindset. I'm a pretty easygoing guy. I like to think people have good intentions, and I always try to be nice to people.
Yeah.
But these people, no. don't act like a gentleman. Don't act like a don't be don't be respectful, because if you treat them like you want to be treated, you're going to have a poor result. And those are the types of people I don't like associating myself with. And when I do, as I said, I'm either making fun of them or insulting their intelligence. And it seems to work pretty well.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the carnivore diet and why I actually I've done a lot of different things in diets myself, and I tried doing carnivore for about a couple of weeks, and I mean, I felt like things were, but I didn't notice any negative health benefits, right? Like I've done keto and things like that, but I definitely had trouble sticking to it. Like I just hit the point where I was like, no, I need some more bulk. But why, I think it's been, popularized probably in the main culture by like Jordan Peterson and his daughter, especially.
Mm.
But what do you've obviously been doing this for a long time. Why do you think that this is the best? Why is this something that people should consider?
And so I discovered a ketogenic carnivore diet back in 2012, 2013.
Mm-hmm.
I was literally Googling how to be healthy, and I came across a book by a guy named Paul Chek titled
Mm-hmm.
How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy. In his book, he mentioned Weston Price, who was a dentist in the early 1900s, who researched indigenous groups. And I started looking into what these people ate, and it was really interesting that the one consistent factor across all of these groups of people were that they consumed a large percentage of their calories from wild animal foods. So, me at the time, having all these gut issues and low energy from taking a drug called Accutane, which damages your liver, I was like, okay, so the health aspect of the diet might be these animal foods as seen in these cultures.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm consuming large amounts of carbohydrates and I'm not digesting them. And then I read a book called Primal Body, Primal Mind by Nora Gagaudis. And this kind of pieced everything together. And I was like, okay, ketogenic paleo diet is the way to go. But at the time, ketogenic paleo diet was only eating meat. I wasn't really aware of the carnivore diet. And at the time, there were some carnivore diet forums, but I didn't really look into them because the premise of that diet was just eating muscle meat, which is not what I do. I thought there was a really big emphasis on organ meat, on the fat percentage in the diet, on the quality of the food, and that wasn't really mentioned. So, even though I knew about the carnivore diet back 6-7 years ago, I didn't really associate myself with the carnivore diet.
Right.
Then in winter of 2017, Sean Baker was on the Joe Rogan podcast. That kind of spike in popularity. Then you had Jordan Peterson on the Joe Rogan podcast, Michaela Peterson on the Joe Rogan podcast. They brought a lot of traffic to the carnivore diet. And for the most part, it's been sold as a diet that removes inflammation because, even low quality, cheap beef is pretty low inflammatory compared to a lot of the foods people are consuming now.
Right.
The one element that is being missed, though, is that these animal foods, if they're raised properly, if you're buying certain types of animal foods, pasture-raised, grass-fed beef, wild-caught fish, pasture-raised eggs, raw, high-quality dairy, any high-quality animal food, pastured pork, free-range chickens, there's a very high nutrient content in those foods. And the forms of those nutrients, those vitamins, minerals, elements, and fatty acids is present and much more available than plant foods. So plant foods not only don't have these nutrients for the most part, we can't really digest them. So although the carnivore diet has been sold as this cure-all for diseases because of the removal of inflammation, most people don't actually reap the benefits that can be from a positive perspective. So yes, you can remove inflammation. That's the main point that's been sold, but people miss, the benefits of the nutrient density. And, recently I've almost, I definitely have, burned a bridge between myself and those people in the carnivore community because Frankie Boy was doing some detective work that he shouldn't have really done. And I realized that there was a reason that these people were advocating for only grain-fed beef consumption. They wouldn't speak. What was odd to me was they would not speak negatively about grass-fed, about grain-fed beef, regardless of what was brought up. They would not speak about fish or eggs or dairy. It seemed like all of these people in the carnivore community gravitated towards grain-fed beef and they wouldn't change their mind. And I was like, what's the reason? The only reason could be that there was some sort of interest group. And I was like, that's crazy. And then I found some evidence that there was, and that kind of burned that bridge. But, my mission has always been to improve the health of people. And as I said, the main reason I started calling it carnivore and what I did carnivore was, my diet is technically carnivore. It just doesn't fit the memo and general ideas of what those people are doing. So now I'm still doing what I did before. And, my viewer base and the people I've helped are very open to my ideas. And, you know, I lay it out like it is. You know, if you eat this food, here are the pros, here are the cons. And if people, you can look at both perspectives and then make a decision based on that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I've been following that whole controversy. I thought that was interesting. I mean, it says a couple of things too, right? The fact that you're willing to, I mean, you've got, you know, people with pitchforks on both sides. You got the vegans that really hate your guts, and now you've got the carnivore people that are supposed to be on your side. Like, but the fact that you're willing to create enemies on both sides really speaks to the fact that you're telling the truth from what you know. Like, you don't have a hidden agenda. Otherwise you would obviously not pick to choose two battles to fight at the same time. But you know, I've been following that, and I thought it was interesting. Like, a lot of people are criticizing the fact that you are selling, that you have your Frankie's free range meats, and I think that's just ridiculous, because like, it's, I don't know, maybe just because I'm a business person and I know that it's like, you know, it's great. You know, I'm here on YouTube to help people, and of course, you know, building businesses. But part of that is you've got to have money, and you have to, you know, the whole point of it is to build some kind of a business. And so I see no problem with that at all, and it makes a lot of sense. And I think they're also upset. It seems like you were saying with the whole grain fed, because they know it's not the most healthy. But then there's this whole argument, well, it's too expensive to buy the high quality foods. But so let's, like, if we don't promote grain fed, then no one will follow us, because it's too expensive, so we'll lose all our following, which to me, you know, it speaks of an ulterior motive much more than selling high quality stuff to people. You know, I just thought that was it's interesting, like, watching this whole thing go down, and how they're attacking you, when it's like, if you look at the science, yeah, you can make the argument that for sure that, you know, that grain fed is still better than a lot of the Western diet being on. But there's, when you look at grain fed versus grass fed, I mean, there's clearly a difference. And wouldn't you want to have the highest quality, you know, food that you're going to have, if that's the main food you're eating? So
Yeah, you could definitely argue that from a nutrient perspective. You know, there are some omega fatty acid profile concerns and lack of nutrients in the grain-fed beef. But the main concern about the grain-fed beef is the incredibly high levels of, like, estrogens, atrazine, herbicides, pesticides, whatever they're using in the meat. And there's actually a couple aspects of this conversation. So I started my meat business like 4 months ago. You know, I was already making YouTube videos for 2.5 years. You know, Sean Baker, Michaela Peterson, Jordan Peterson, all of those people had been, you know, selling butcher box meat and other meat companies for 2 years. You know, they were pushing their own meat products, their own products. You know, Sean Baker had the Carnivore Diet training system. He was, you know, kind of making a living off of this carnivore diet, this diet memo, for at least 2 years. And then suddenly I decide to do something. And my meat company isn't really, you know, if it wasn't successful, I would have been like, all right, whatever. But, you know, I've worked in New York City restaurants for years. I'm very good at food sourcing. And I noticed that people aren't able to get quality foods. And I will tell you right now, if on Frankie's free range meats, our food quality is as high as you can get. And yeah, there are some other online, maybe a handful. The majority of online meat sellers don't have, you know, the high quality grass-fed stuff that we're offering, because we try to handpick specifically and only offer, you know, the like yellow fat, decent marbling, grass-fed quality meat that tastes good. We are priced a lot lower, and I mean, I wish I was making money. I'm lucky I broke even right now. I broke even. We're hoping to start making money hopefully by next year. I mean, and honestly, if my goal was to make money, I would have made a lot more money doing other things than starting this meat company. So, you know, for them to say that, and I gave away like $4,000 or $5,000 worth of meat on my YouTube channel of fresh beef. And I've never seen anyone do something like that. So to badger me for that is completely crazy and ridiculous. I was hoping to save some money on meat myself too, but our product inventory is flying out really quick. What was I going to touch on? Elements of people criticizing me. So we have the aspect of, you know, them criticizing the meat company. You also have to consider, like, these people, like, as much as grain-fed meat is very cheap, very affordable, very approachable for people, there are alternatives that are the same price. So, you know, a lot of wild caught fish can be very cheap. You know, you can buy very lean meat and then buy a higher quality fat. I mean, to say that grain-fed meat is affordable is ridiculous, because farmers sell grass-fed beef fat for $1, $2, $3, $4 a pound. And you could go buy a lean fish, a lean, cheap piece of meat that doesn't have as much of the negatives, and then go and have that grass-fed beef fat from a farmer. Plus, all of the evidence I've seen, it's just that these people want the easy way out. They want to go to Costco and buy a grain-fed ribeye and go home and eat it. They don't want to have to go to a farm, buy a whole cow, source their food properly and do things like that. So each of those arguments are really ridiculous. And at the end of the day, I mean, yeah, I can understand, people are lazy, you want them to have a solution, but what's the difference between going to the store and buying a grain-fed steak versus buying a piece of wild-caught fish? Why are you advocating that for people? Never really made sense to me. And there are like 2 or 3 anecdotes in this carnivore community of people that have been following a grain-fed beef diet for a long period of time, but that doesn't justify, our indigenous ancestors, thousands and thousands and thousands of people for, the corresponding amount of years, we're only consuming wild animal foods and wild plant foods, and grain-fed beef didn't exist. What's interesting is if you're eating a steak that has a high marbling content, that's something that has developed in the breeds of animals we have now. Normally, animals only store fat around certain parts of their body, the kidneys, the belly, the brisket, the ribs, marrow, brain. There are certain parts of the animal that are fatty that we don't really eat anymore, but because we've engineered our animals a certain way, now you have these steaks that are almost, the Maasai weren't talking about eating, ribeyes cooked over a fire. They were talking about raw milk, blood, organs, and all that stuff.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. That's true. I guess that's why also, like, it's when you look at like game meat, like elk and whatnot, it's, it's not, it doesn't have that marbling. It's a totally different thing because it's really been engineered, right? So, but yeah, no, that I think that makes a lot of sense too, as far as, well, I've always considered, and I think, what you said with about the ease, like I've always tried to figure out, like, okay, just give me whatever is the highest quality. Like, I don't have, like, you know it, like, you research it, like, you can source the meats, like, you've got that level of expertise. Not everyone does. So I've always said, I don't care what the price is, just give me the best, right? Because this is going in my body. I'm if it costs me, like, at one point I was spending $50 a day on one meal. I only eat one meal a day. And I was like, and people are like, you're crazy spending $50 on one meal. I'm like, it doesn't matter, because this is like, this is the most important thing in my life is my nutrition, like what I'm going to eat. So I don't care what it costs me. Just, like, let me find the place that I can get the highest quality possible thing. And so I think that's why it makes sense to me. Like, when I saw that you're creating your store, it's like, okay, well, I'll gladly pay whatever I need to pay in order for someone to already figure this out for me, and I can trust this, right? Whereas, if I think that barrier is like you said, it's like, well, the average person trying to go to the farm and buy the cow and not even knowing, how to even handle that situation, it's going to be hard. There's going to be a high barrier to entry. So,
yeah, we definitely have to keep in mind, the average person spends, I think it's around $150, $160 a week on food in general. But that includes groceries, that includes coffee, that includes eating out.
Right.
So even though spending $50 a day, sounds kind of crazy, it really isn't that far off of what people are spending per week on food anyway. But what people have to understand is that you're investing in your health long term. Yeah. And if you're not spending at least, I would say, $20 per day on food, your food quality probably isn't that high, or you're very lucky and have a cheap food source. I mean, at the minimum, you're going to be spending $15, $20 a day if you're buying quality food regardless. Right. For someone to say that their budget is so restrictive that they can only afford to eat on $5 or $10 a day, there is really very few animal foods that you would be able to do that on in general. I mean, you're probably going to most people that have budgets like that are eating, rice, potatoes, really cheap meals, cheap commodity plant foods. For someone to go to the supermarket and buy, 5 pounds of really cheap grain-fed beef, on sale for $2 a pound, if that's what you need to do, I have to say, listen, I know, people have bills. Life can be hard for some people, but you have to understand what you're doing. And if you really understood what you were doing in buying that cheap, crappy meat that's potentially damaging your health, you would try to put yourself in a position as soon as possible to be able to afford, the higher quality animal foods. And if they don't agree with that and they don't understand that, it's really that they're either ignorant and don't care, or, I don't know if it's really a sense of pride thing. Like they don't want to admit they're wrong. They want to keep doing it. Either way, to put it bluntly, they're wrong, and they need to do more research and have an understanding of these animal foods. And listen, you could go buy that cheap grain-fed beef. You can believe whatever you want, but don't tell other people it's okay. That's the problem I have. It's that they can do whatever they want, but the fact that they're messaging so many people and reaching out to so many people, saying that grain-fed beef is okay, it's not a good look. Michaela Peterson does it, but what she doesn't mention is that she's in Canada. The grain-fed beef in Canada isn't full of all the, the crap that the grain-fed beef in America has. So it's like, it's like giving someone like water. Like if you're saying, oh, I have the best water and it's really high quality filtered water, and she's selling it to people. And then, she brings that water over to America and they fill it with chlorine, fluoride, and, pesticides, herbicides, and chemicals. And she starts selling that same water and expects the same results that she was having in Canada with her diet. And I'm led to believe that, and there's evidence that shows this, people following that advice in America have drastically different results than other parts of the world because of the quality of the beef.
Sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that's a big factor that people don't consider. Now, what about the vegans that so again, like one of my best friends is vegan, so I don't have anything necessarily against like people that ethically choose to be vegan because they feel like, as long as someone is consistent with their own principles, I'm fine with that. But what I do have a problem with is that when they're trying to say that it's the healthiest, and it's sort of, I always feel like there's always this deception here, because in reality, I think, well, I don't know, I guess some vegans are just so brainwashed, but a lot of vegans know that a vegan diet is not the most healthy diet. But because they have the ethical concerns, they want to push that on everyone else. They claim that it's the most healthy diet, even though they don't really truly believe it, because they haven't really done the research, like you said. They don't really have a leg to stand on. They're kind of mixing their own personal beliefs and ethics with science, and that's where I actually get angry about it. Is like you said, just the same as the grass-fed beef. It's like you're spreading the misinformation based on something that you feel or something you're trying to push, but it's deceptive. At least be objective and say, yeah, technically an animal product diet is better for your health overall, but regardless, you should still only be vegan because it's wrong, right? Like at least say that and I'll be okay with it. But what's your thoughts? Like, why specifically would you say that, and what kind of evidence do you have to say that a meat diet is more healthy for humans?
Yeah, unfortunately, we have a boatload of conventional wisdom and things that people are very familiar with in modern culture that are promoting the ideas that are usually behind a vegan diet. So we have the health aspect, the environmental aspect, and the moral aspect. From the health aspect, this information is so difficult to understand and find. I've met quite a few vegan girls, mostly girls actually, in the city that I've talked to them and they just don't have it's like talking to a wall. Like I'm explaining to them, you can't even explain a very simple concept like beta carotene, vitamin A, is not actually the same as vitamin A in animal foods. It doesn't get converted in the body. Even explaining a very simple concept like that to these people was way over their head. So I think that, the modern conventional wisdom of, eat your fruits and veggies, whole grains are good for you. There's not really an understanding of the nutrients that are necessary in meat outside of B12. So these people are just riding on, oh no, of course it's healthy. It's fruits, veggies, and grains. And then their health deteriorates. This one girl had literally 17 cavities in a year. It was absolutely absurd. But it's really just beating a wall. These people don't have an understanding of nutrition. You have to realize, when you're talking even about a very simple concept, most people have no clue. Even talking to my parents, they don't understand this stuff. You have to have a very basic explanation of things. But if you want to actually understand the science, and I don't consider myself smart by any means, a lot of this stuff is very difficult to understand. But you have basic science mechanisms, like for carotene. So when you consume a carrot, carotene is the plant form of vitamin A. It converts at very low rates in the body, and there's a threshold. This is because of an enzyme called the beta-carotene 15 deoxygenase enzyme. So in order for this enzyme to be utilized, it has to be cleaved. And the enzyme that actually allows beta-carotene to be absorbed is inhibited by substances that usually occur in vegetables. So yeah, the carrots is giving you the carotene that your body should convert, but there's flavonoids and flavanones in the carrot that are inhibiting the absorption. So reality is, if you eat a carrot, you're not getting any vitamin A, but trying to explain that to people is beyond, their understanding. And that's not even the deepest level of understanding of that conversion. Once you go into those enzymes and genes, that's where there's dozens and dozens of different proteins that are involved in those processes. So you can imagine it's what's going to convince people more. Fruits and veggies are good, fat clogs your arteries, or me explaining that for 15 other vitamins. You're really fighting a losing battle on the health front, because what everyone believes is not true. You have to kind of go at it from like an extreme point of view. You can like saying, oh, vegans kill babies, this, that, and that. There's simpler examples, like showing that, there's many studies showing that vegan and vegetarian women have very low levels of DHA in their breast milk. There's much more approachable stuff that you can attack them from the health and, not really fitness, but just the health standpoint. Again, though, we don't have an understanding of what health actually is. So if you don't know that, and people don't know that you need animal foods and certain nutrients, fat soluble vitamins from animal foods to be healthy, how are you supposed to explain that to them? Because they think they're getting everything they need from the plant foods. Same thing with the environment. We're led to believe, global warming, emissions. The one thing I will say on the environment is that, animal agriculture is 1/3 of all agricultural emissions, which is 3% of 9%. And that's way overstated and blown out of proportion.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of messing around with statistics there. I think the environment is the biggest lie that people believe. And then you have the moral or ethical aspect. But then you got to ask yourself, what's more ethical? Ruining the land, displacing millions of insects, small rodents, fawns, deer, animals. You're literally destroying the land when you're growing conventional monocropping. You are killing animals. You are killing insects. You are killing small animals. Or you just don't want to kill one cow or one pig. So the moral or ethical aspect from the perspective of a vegan who's supporting conventional agriculture doesn't make any sense. It really doesn't. That's the argument from the health front and the moral front and the environmental front. Vegans are wrong in every aspect. It's just you see all this stuff at face value. You see fruits, vegetables, and grains. Of course, they're good for you. It's what we've been told for 50 years. Of course, the environment thing, the global warming, that's just been beaten into our head so much people believe it now. And people are detached for the moral, ethical stuff. So they know an animal dies for that piece of meat, but they don't really think of all the insects and all the critters that die when you're pulling, corn or wheat out of the crop soil. And one thing someone might bring up would be, a lot of these grains and these crops are being fed to animals, but that's absolutely not true. There's cows are meant to be in a sustainable ecosystem, eating grass on pasture. And, if you go to the farm and eat 1 or 2 cows worth of pastured beef per year, that's by far going to be, what's best for the environment, what's best for your health, what's best from a moral or ethical standpoint. And the vegans don't seem to want to wrap their head. I mean, I've convinced plenty of vegans that, I've probably had hundreds of people that I've converted on my channel. But the vast majority of them, as I like to quote, are cute, cuddly animal lovers.
Yeah.
They literally, these are the people that go to farms and play with goats and animals. They really love animals. So there's definitely that element to it.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And then when you look at, well, actually, I thought it was interesting that video you did recently on it made me question whether or not is there actually such a thing as a true vegan because of all the animal parts, the insect parts in all
Yeah.
the foods. So I guess we've never really seen a true vegan, right? It's like we don't know what if you only ate plant food, what that would actually do to you. Maybe you would just die because we don't have any evidence. We don't have anyone that's only eating plant food, as far as I can tell from that video. It seems like it'd be impossible to only eat plant food. And so I think that's an interesting aspect of it. And then choose to say that an ant's life is more valuable than a cat's life. I don't know. I mean, not that we're eating cats, but but the other thing that I thought was also compelling was the empirical evidence, right? It's like you said, it's like very hard to convince people of the science, but then it's like, and I like the fact that you're looking at the YouTubers, like, and looking at their pictures of vegans, and you can see them declining as people choose to become vegan over time. Whereas, it's like, I don't know, you don't see that, it's always like when I was telling my buddies, like, oh, or when I'm coaching people, they're like, okay, well, what kind of exercise should I do at the gym? Does CrossFit make the most sense? Like, should I lift, Arnold style weights? I'm like, look around the gym and look at the big guy whose physique you'd like. See what he's doing. See if he's on a little balance ball, like, you know what I mean, doing core exercises. He's not. He's at the bench. He's doing squat, right? He's doing the shit that Arnold was doing, and that's why he looks like Arnold. Like, it's the same thing when I look. It's like, okay, well, let me see what the vegans look like. Let me see what carnivores look like, and the in between. And it's like, okay, to me, that's the most compelling evidence that I can find. But
it's really tough. I was just watching a video yesterday, very pretty young girl, actress or something, and she just said she's like going vegan. And she's like so excited about this new vegan thing. She's been vegan for 2 months. But what, there's been dozens and dozens and dozens of ex-vegans on YouTube already that have had millions and millions of followers. So you really start questioning, how impressionable are these people? Is there funding and incentive to put people on these diets? I was watching a Victoria's Secret model's video of her day of eating the other day, and the only animal food she had in her diet was 1 egg and like a spoonful of feta cheese. It's completely ridiculous. So from the influencer standpoint, from the YouTube standpoint, we see all of these people develop severe health problems. There's ample evidence for it. And then we still see, people popping out of the woodwork, usually larger channels that have hundreds of thousands of people following them. And as someone who's, rummaged around YouTube for a while, a lot of popular vegan channels with not that many viewers that are following it seem to be the people that are also suffering, except you have the group of people that are probably paid influencers that suck these people in, and then you have the people that genuinely believe it. I think those are the two parts to it. They have the vegan people that are really popular and suck people in, and then you have probably, I would say there's, how many thousands and thousands of YouTube vegans have YouTube channels that maybe only have a few thousand subscribers, and their health is slowly deteriorating. And even if you go in the comments of these videos, people say, hey, you don't look good, you're not healthy. You have to look better. But they're just, the spotlight is not on all of these negative things. And every single time that a vegan has, made an ex-vegan video, recent really popular ones, probably the past few months, Raw Ivana, Raw Alignment, Tim Sheaf, it seems like what the hell? Like, did the vegan community collapse? If that happened in any other sort of diet community or online YouTube community, people would be like, what the hell is going on? And then one of those vegans, actually Raw Alignment, is now with the people that are doing the grain-fed carnivore stuff. So it's really crazy. Yeah. If that, and I should have probably brought that up earlier. If that's not evidence that something fishy is going on, I don't know what to tell you, because this girl was vegan for 5 years, has probably, I think she has like 1 million YouTube followers.
Yeah.
And then she does an ex-vegan video, kind of everything like crumbles apart. Same thing everyone else. Hormones are in the dumps, really bad gut issues, don't feel good, a lot of mental fog. And then, 3 months later, she's selling grass-fed beef burgers.
Right. Yeah, yeah. Well, I don't even trust, sometimes. Well, the other thing is the deception part of it as well. Is like how many people are quote vegan who are actually not vegan, because you don't see what they're actually eating. They're claiming to be vegan because they feel like they have to once they've, so there's going to be a whole group of those people that are pretending to be vegan, but they're actually cheating every once in a while, and it's okay because you don't see them on camera doing it. And then also in the bodybuilding community, I know there's a lot of quote vegan bodybuilders that are completely 100% on gear. There's no way that they're achieving that physique naturally. And so then all these people are saying, oh, well, look at this guy, look at this vegan bodybuilder. Look, so obviously you can build muscle and get ripped as a vegan. And I'm like, yeah, well, yeah, you can if you inject a huge amount of testosterone and and other chemicals into your body, then sure, yeah, the hormones are going to outplay everything else in diet and nutrition. But yeah, so I think that you can't really, there's so much that you can't trust out there.
Yeah, I mean, if they're willing to lie about the main things, the moral, the ethical, the environmental stuff, why not lie about everything else? You said earlier, these people aren't really vegan because they're sucking down insects and bugs by the gram. Foods like peanut butter, coffee, the foods these vegans love actually have a considerable amount of insects that might be giving them nutrition. But every single vegan I've interviewed that's been an ex-vegan cheated on their diet every few months, but still consider themselves a vegan. Like these people reach out to me. They're like, oh, I was ex-vegan 5 years, 4 years, 3 years. And then as I start talking to them and, I'm kind of like screening them before I interview them. They're like, oh, I cheated. Like they cheated every 2 months. I was like, all right, so hold on. There's a period of time where you are actually vegan without cheating on animal foods. And it's like, well, let's just fudge it then. So yeah, you don't see what these people are eating off camera. The gear and the steroid stuff is really irritating to me because I mean, you've been in the fitness community for a while. I started bodybuilding when I was like 13. So I'm very aware and cognizant of that scene, but people who aren't will genuinely believe these people are natural. And
100%.
It's like it's like these people are looking at the sky and telling you it's green. And you're like, no, it's not. It's so, what these people don't understand, if someone who is experienced in fitness tells you that someone is on gear or on steroids and you're not involved in fitness, just listen to them because it's painfully obvious. And it doesn't matter if you've seen people that are natural like him before. If the kid is benching 450 pounds when he's 22 years old, that is not an achievable natural. There's so many things, and understanding the level of what's natural and what's not requires that time in the gym, that training. And, you have guys that are, a natural standpoint. You have guys that are in the gym for 10, 15 years, and they look really muscular and big. The strength is a big thing, and the arm size is a big thing, and the age of the person. So, but especially vegan, because, vegan on gear on steroids is the only muscular vegan that exists. All the other ones are falling apart and have no muscle tone.
Yeah. It's just about I mean, like I said, I've coached a lot of people that are on vegan diets, and I just can't put muscle on them. Like no matter what I do, it's like you got to just keep on eating more protein. It doesn't matter. It's like the animal proteins are so critical. So yeah, but yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting to see. But you're absolutely right. Like you have to have the eye for it. If you haven't been in the fitness industry, if you haven't pushed your limits to the max and seen what it is, and you don't know what is humanly achievable, like naturally or not. So little shift here. I'm curious about your thoughts on a couple other topics. One of them being sun, because I noticed you did some videos on sun exposure. This is something I've been very interested in because I don't wear sunscreen. I run about 40, 50, 60 miles a week, depending on what I'm training for. And so I'm out here in San Diego running in the sun, and everyone's like, oh, you're going to die. You're going to get cancer. And I don't know. I mean, I'm curious to hear your research on it and what's your perspective on that.
Yeah, so this ties back into diet a little bit. And we didn't really touch on how to do a carnivore diet in a healthy way. I mean, it's pretty simple. Two things. You want about an 80% fat to 20% protein ratio, and you want to be getting nutrients from certain foods. I've covered that on my channel a lot. But the reason we need these nutrients in aspects to vitamin D3 are, you have vitamin A and vitamin K2, which are needed to metabolize and absorb vitamin D3 efficiently, as well as to mobilize calcium. And then you have Of course, cholesterol, which is needed to absorb vitamin D3 as well. And most importantly, for not having to worry about cancer, is omega fatty acid ratio in the diet.
Mm-hmm.
If your omega-6 is high, and everyone's omega-6 is high, unless you're, the majority of people, probably 99% of people in the United States, have imbalanced omega-6 to omega-3 ratios. And what that does is all of the fats, all of the lipids in your body turn into the fats you're eating. And these omega-6 fats are very prone to oxidation. So if you go out in the sun and you're tanning and your omega-6 is off, you're going to have high levels of oxidative stress in your skin, because vitamin D3, nitric oxide, it's literally, when you go in the sun, you're literally oxidizing your body to some degree. You're causing free radical damage. And if those fats are omega-6 fats, that's where you're going to have issues where your skin isn't going to recover, especially if you don't have the nutrients needed to heal your skin, vitamin A. So when I've talked about tanning in the past, if you have adequate nutrition in your diet and your omega-3 to omega-6 ratio is balanced, you have absolutely no concern of skin cancer or damaging your skin. And of course, there's more elements to this, but think of it this way. Our hunter-gatherers, to procure food, you have to be in the sun. Right. And if you don't have, put it this way, if you don't have a grocery store, you have to be in the sun to get food. And getting food takes a long time, farming, hunting, whatever it is. And shelter-wise too, these people didn't sit in the house all day. Humans are meant to be in the sun for 10, 12, 15 hours a day. There's no disputing that at all. Yeah. Humans are meant to be in the sun for long periods of time. And what's kind of weird is like people don't look at, like people dismiss Africans and say, oh, well, they don't get skin cancer because of their skin color. Yeah, but those people are in the sun all day. Why wouldn't Europeans be in the sun all day? And yeah, there's some protective aspect of the black skin and them having high vitamin D3 levels, but it's more that those people tend to not have diets that are as high in omega-6, and they also tend to stick to their roots of animal foods that have a higher nutrient quality. So if you're able to fix these elements in your diet and you go in the sun, your skin will heal. And this happens to most people on a carnivore diet. Most people go carnivore, even keto, and their skin starts healing when they're in the sun. They stop burning. But if you have to be in the sun as a human being to procure food, how can you argue that you're not supposed to tan and you need to wear sunscreen and all of this stuff? It's from a logical and like an ancestral standpoint, it's kind of ridiculous. But I always have to apply science to it too. You can you can literally Google like NCBI sunscreen cancer, and sunscreen hasn't been shown to improve cancer rates. And then if you look at, vitamin D3 levels and skin cancer, people with higher vitamin D3 levels have lower rates of skin cancer. Yeah. So all of the evidence in the vitamin D3 and the sun and the tanning points to, the modern problems, but it's tough because you could show people studies that say, okay, well, if you go in the sun and you put on sunscreen, you actually have a higher rate of skin cancer. You have studies saying that, oh, well, these people that got more sunlight had lower rates of skin cancer. And then people still dismiss that and they appeal to the modern authority of, oh, put on your sunscreen, avoid sun exposure, because the solution of explaining them, the reason you're having issues healing your skin is because of a lack of nutrients and omega ratios. As we said earlier, that stuff is very difficult to understand. To understand the mechanisms behind that and the appeal to authority is huge. It's not something that's been beaten to death in people for years and years and years. But if you look at, rates of any chronic disease, whether it's skin cancer or diabetes, obesity, it's all been getting worse and worse. The seed oils here, the high omega-6, soybean, canola, cottonseed, all these oils are definitely a contributing factor to the poor health of people. So if you're able to start with a baseline of no inflammation in your diet, there are a lot of aspects to health that, people are missing. Sun is just one of them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of times we try to take things in isolation, but it's a system that has so many variables that are all working together, just like our DNA itself. It's like you can't separate out things. Like our whole body is a system, and it's a very complex system. And so it's not like you can separate one variable out and be like, okay, well, this is what causes skin cancer, for instance. But yeah, so that's interesting. Okay, so and I've also felt like also another topic to get your opinion on as well. I noticed for me, I started doing eating one meal a day it's been about 4 or 5 years now, probably close to 5 years. And I noticed a drastic change, at least in what I perceived, of my aging since I started doing that, since I started doing the fasting. I also feel like there's a contributing factor as far as like cancer rates with fasting as well. But just in general health, I've noticed, like I said, I feel like I have almost like, obviously I can't completely halt aging, but my aging has drastically slowed down since I started doing that fasting. I know you've talked a little bit about fasting on your channel, but what's your opinion on that and how that relates to everything we've been talking about?
Yeah, I spoke. I did a kind of update video on fasting last week. Most of the period of time I've been on this diet, I have incorporated fasting.
Mm-hmm.
But the biggest thing to understand for this is think about how much inflammation is present in the average person's diet.
Mm-hmm.
They wake up in the morning, they drink their cup of coffee bug juice slop. They take whatever supplements,
Here I
whatever.
am drinking.
Oh, well, no, that's
No,
coffee. It's an additive thing. If the
yeah,
only bad thing you drink throughout the day is coffee, you're doing good. But these
yeah,
people aren't drinking one cup of coffee. They're drinking, so you have that cup of coffee in the morning,
yeah,
then they have their croissant, their crappy high omega-6 meal, crappy meat, whatever they're eating. Very
yeah,
low quality breakfast, high inflammatory, refined grain, sugar, whatever it may be, whether it's a pastry, a bacon, egg, and cheese sandwich, maybe with low quality meat and low quality cheese. Then an hour or two later, they get to work, they have another coffee, douse their stomach again. And again, quality is important here. Buying a quality coffee or fresh roasted coffee is way different. People are putting like these creamers in it. The Coffee Mate stuff is pure poison.
mm,
Putting like that type of stuff in their coffee. Then they're having, a ham and cheese sandwich for lunch, pizza. They're eating basically to not go into this too much. Every single person in the United States is putting something incredibly inflammatory into their body every hour or two. And just by fasting and removing that inflammation, you're able to drastically improve your health.
mm-hmm.
Now, if people fast and on a standard American diet, when they go back to the standard American diet, they're just going to feel as crappy. They might feel slightly better because they lost the weight or their body was able to recover. They're giving their organs a break and their whole body a break from the inflammation, but they're still not giving themselves the nutrients their body needs to heal. So
Right.
if these people work, in my fasting video, my emphasis was if you're not following a high quality diet with a lot of animal foods, then the benefits of fasting would not eclipse that. So,
Mm-hmm.
your body's ability to heal, recovery, organ health, autophagy, whatever benefit you're looking to achieve from fasting, all of that stuff is achieved on a nutrient dense diet. And in a perfect world, if you're on a nutrient dense diet, if you're in a low pollution environment, if everything is literally perfect, there would technically be no real benefit to fasting. Technically.
Right.
So fasting is more of something that we use to alleviate modern issues. That's why I fast. Even me, someone that seems like, oh, well, you have all access to this good food. You seem like you could follow this stuff perfectly. I go to New York City. There's pollution factors. There's EMF factors. There's pollution in water too. There's so many things in our modern world: stress, lack of sleep. Once you put this stuff in, fasting is very appealing. If you went 1 or 2 days without sleep, you're probably better off not eating and giving your body a break. So modern stress, all these issues we have now give us a reason to fast. But the reason most people see a benefit from fasting immediately is removal of inflammation, which, as we spoke about with the carnivore diet, will remove your inflammation. But if you don't get the benefits of the high quality animal foods, you're missing out.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially the inflammation, because that seems to be the biggest factor. And it's interesting too. I think a lot of even a lot of the vegan diets, just what Western diet in general, we have so much sugar, right? So much of that and grain that causes that inflammation. Aside from the other chemicals and pollutants in the environment as well. Now, as far as like, okay, so one thing I think that's really critical to address before we wrap this up here is the idea that it's not just like if someone's doing carnivore diet, and you mentioned this, but I just wanted to reemphasize it, give you a chance to talk about this a little bit more. The idea that they're not just eating steaks or just not eating chicken right, it's like they need to eat, for me, when I was doing this, and even still now, I try to incorporate fish roe, so that I'm getting, the full nutrient profile. I'm not a huge liver fan. I'd love if someone made like some kind of like half ground beef, half liver type of kind of thing that I could or I could kind of mask it in so I could get it down. But so I eat a lot of whole eggs and fish eggs instead, to try and get as much of that nutrient profile. But what's the difference between someone that's like, okay, I'm going carnivore, and they just eat ribeyes every night, versus someone who's doing it right?
Yeah, so the first person will remove inflammation. Their omega fatty acid ratios might be a little bit off. But I mean, that could be fixed pretty easily by just, consuming a little bit of fish. What we're missing is the vitamins. So vitamin A is really only found in liver. And although you could argue that not every single indigenous person would have been able to consume liver in our modern state of nutrient deficiency, yeah, you could probably, replenish your vitamin A stores by eating large amounts of quality animal foods every day. But the best way to do it is to incorporate liver into your diet. And liver isn't only, I mean, liver, yes, it's thousands of times higher in vitamin A than just about every other food. But liver also has all of the other vitamins that your body needs. To get the B vitamins, yeah, you eat meat, but, liver and oysters and shellfish, a lot of these organ meats are 10, 15, 20 times higher in vitamin B12 than muscle meat is. So, incorporating that's how you get your vitamin A. That's how you get your vitamin B12. These organ meats and lightly cooked meat does have vitamin C, and your body's demand for vitamin C is much lower on a low carbohydrate diet because sugar metabolism impedes vitamin C. Vitamin D3, of course, it's from the sun, but we are getting important nutrients from the carnivore diet that help us absorb vitamin D3. Vitamin E is mainly to prevent the oxidation of fats in food, and all animal foods contain enough vitamin E to stabilize the fats. You have vitamin K2, which is contained in fermented foods as well as quality animal foods. And then like raw cheeses, eggs have vitamin K2, liver has vitamin K2, but anything fermented. And then you have the omega fatty acids. And this is where the food quality really ties in here. Of course, we know fish is great for omega fatty acids, but that eggs are great. The hard part about eggs is you need to get really quality eggs, and finding eggs that are soy free, minimal amount of corn, that get a large amount of forage is difficult. And if the animal isn't getting pasture and forage, the nutrient content isn't going to be high. On paper, if you ate like 5 or 10 egg yolks a day, you would actually be getting all the nutrients you need. It's just, unfortunately, the omega fatty acid profile of most eggs, is not conducive to overall health. I mean, it's pretty easy to know, all you're really doing is, you have a couple egg yolks a day, a few bites of raw cheese, a few bites of liver, and you try to keep your fat to protein intake optimal. Mm-hmm. So that's the nutrient aspect. From the energy aspect, it's ideal to consume about 80% of your calories from fat. And This is equivalent to like eating like 73-27 ground beef. So it's not like, you're not eating 80-20. It's maybe a little more fatty than that. But if you're buying steaks or roasts or chops, most of those cuts of muscle meat are not fatty enough. So people tend to add butter, actual beef fat, tallow. Problem is most fat sources are not quality. Mm-hmm. And how the animal was raised, as you guys can assume, translates directly to the amount of nutrients in the fat. So, raw grass-fed butter from a local farm is worlds better than any sort of butter you're going to buy from the supermarket. Same thing with, raw grass-fed beef fat or, pasture-raised egg yolks versus the alternatives in the supermarket. And, for those of you guys that might be thinking, hey, I can't afford this. Hey, I don't want to only eat animal foods. The nutrients you're obtaining on the carnivore diet aren't really from super fatty foods. And a lot of these groups of people that were in very good health weren't getting 80% of their calories from fat, as long as the 80% of those calories was coming from an energy source. So they were eating root vegetables, starches, tubers, certain fruits, certain things. You just have to keep in mind that, 45 to 65% of the calories of these people came from animal foods, about 35 to 55% of that being from plants. So even though we're talking about the carnivore diet, how great it is for your health, all these indigenous groups still consumed a large amount of wild plant foods or quality plant foods. So the purpose of the carnivore diet is to fix things. You know, we're trying to remove the inflammation we've dealt with our whole lives. We're trying to replenish the nutrients we've been deficient in our whole lives. And a carnivore diet that's trying to maintain your health is going to look way different than a carnivore diet that is, you know, trying to fix those initial nutrient deficiencies. You know, because I go periods of months sometimes where I only eat really high quality beef and fat. You know, I might not even touch organs. I might not even touch fish eggs, you know, for a long period of time. That being said, those foods like fish roe, caviar, liver, raw dairy, those foods were actually fed in times of like fertility, like when they wanted to have babies. So there is a lot of ancestral evidence for using these foods to promote developmental stages of life. But as a developed person without nutrient deficiencies, the maintenance version of the carnivore diet is much more practical. Okay. And there's no reason you couldn't consume certain plant foods.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was going to ask you about the 80-20 of it. So, because not everyone is going to go carnivore. I mean, even myself, I tried it for a while, and maybe I'll try it again. But if someone had to do the 80-20, would it look like perhaps doing the fasting, some amount of fasting to cut the inflammation, and then, you know, they're eating some plant foods for sure, but they're avoiding sugars and highly processed foods. And as far as the meat sources, they're getting high quality meats and making sure to get organ meats. Would that be, is there something else that you would kind of advise kind of for the general person? If they're not going to follow carnivore, how could they take what you know from it and optimize their health?
Yeah. So very simply, try to get about 80% of your calories from fats or carbohydrate sources that are high quality. And that could be 75%, that could be 85%, it could be 70%. Leaner people tend to eat more protein. And then you want to get about at least 20% of your calories. And again, there's variance, 20, 15, 25, 30% of your calories from quality protein animal foods. If you get 80% of your calories approximately from a fat or carbohydrate energy source, and 20% of your calories approximately from a quality protein source, that is the ideal energy ratio that we see in these indigenous people. Now, the percentage of calories from plant foods versus animal foods in your diet, this can vary drastically. I would say minimum total calories from animal foods for ideal health, you want it to be around 65 or 70%. You can go lower some days, and even the blue zones, the people that live to like 110, 120, the percentage of animal foods in their diet was actually as low as 30, 35%. So yes, you can do that. But those people were shorter. They did consume more animal foods when they were children and babies. And the reason they didn't consume more animal foods was not because they didn't want to, it's because they didn't have access to them. That's the main thing. But then also keep in mind, those people were following very high quality diets their whole lives. They don't have the modern things to make up for.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. I thought it was interesting too, just as kind of a side note, because you mentioned that like the raw cheese, and I always thought that I was lactose intolerant. And after watching some of your videos, I went out to the store and I bought raw milk, even though everyone was like, "Oh, you're going to die if you drink raw milk." And I got raw cheese, and I had a nice big glass of raw milk. Totally fine. Like, I was like, this is insane. Like, if I just touch milk before or cheese, huge difference. I couldn't believe how much of a difference that makes, and how much we take for granted that, oh, just the milk we buy in the store is just fine.
And milk is a big one. One of my regrets is I made a 45-minute video on dairy, which is probably like the most informative video on dairy online. I should have probably sold it as a webinar or something. But yeah, I mean, the dairy in the supermarket, it's cows raised on low quality feed. The nutrient content is abysmal. They pasteurize it and homogenize it. Pasteurizing removes any beneficial bacteria, and then homogenizing it makes the fat particles cause damage to the gut lining. And then you also have additives like the vitamin D and the vitamin A that they add to milk sometimes can be very damaging and taxing on the liver on certain substances. So listen, I complain to my viewers all the time about how dairy intolerant I am, but that's because I always overdo it. I can take one, if I took one glass of raw goat milk or raw cow milk, I could probably digest it despite being incredibly lactose intolerant. So, I mean, I love raw dairy in general, even though I don't really consume it because of my allergies. It's very high in nutrients. It has everything your body needs. except the forms of fatty acids are in the plant form as opposed to the animal form. But if you have low, I don't want to get too much into that. That's a whole nother explanation. Point is, raw milk, raw dairy products, incredibly nutrient dense. And the difference between that gallon of milk in your supermarket and the gallon of milk from the farmer down the street is the difference between you being the average sick, fat, unhealthy, unhappy American and you, looking like you're chiseled out of marble. That's as simple, as weird as it sounds. The amount of effort put into that is, all right, do you want to spend $2 on something poisoning yourself, or do you want to spend $8, $9, $10 on something that will give you vitality?
Yeah, no, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Even the same thing, I noticed the same thing with the eggs too. Is also like I started paying a lot more. I mean, the difference between the 99-cent eggs that you can buy or $1.99 for a dozen, and then you've got eggs that are literally $9 or $10 a dozen. This is like 5 times the price, but it's a huge, huge difference. I mean, even just when you crack open the egg and you see that the yolk is so orange, like a dark orange, like it's very clear. But I think most people are just used to buying the $1.99 dozen eggs, and they don't think about these things. But it makes a huge, huge difference.
100%. This quality aspect applies to all animal foods. It's just more apparent in some. So, milk is very obvious. You drink raw milk, then you drink supermarket milk. You're like, that's not even a food.
Right.
You have pastured eggs versus conventional eggs.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, those conventional eggs aren't even a food. Beef is actually eerily close, unfortunately. Beef is really close. I did a video comparing grain-fed beef to grass-fed beef. When you eat the beef raw, it's very obvious the grain-fed stuff is not good. But once you cook it, salt it, add pepper to it, add the char from the grill, that's where you can disguise the grain-fed beef very well. But if you take pork, quality pork versus crappy pork, quality chicken versus crappy chicken, worlds of a difference.
Yeah.
Fish can be a little bit harder to distinguish because people are used to eating low quality, crappy seafood, but good seafood compared to beef is really the only exception here that people get away with a lot.
Now, a question on the fish, because this is kind of an interesting one. And I think because a lot of people, I don't know, I had trouble finding, like for salmon, for example, the farm raised versus the wild caught. I had trouble finding non-frozen wild caught salmon, right? I wanted fresh. And so I was like, okay, I was debating this with someone and I was like, okay, let me just look this up and see, what is really the difference between the wild caught and the farm raised. And when I looked at it, I was like, well, in terms of getting omega-3s, right? Like my research, I was looking at it, it's like, okay, well, yeah, okay, the wild caught technically has a better ratio of omega-3 to omega-6, but when you look at it in general compared to other foods, like the omega-3 is so much higher in salmon in general that it's almost negligible aside from the other possible pollutants and issues with that. Am I right in that analysis? What's your thoughts on that? Because
on paper for sure. Farmed salmon is better than grain-fed beef on paper for sure. Depending on the amount of pollutants in the water, though, listen, if I eat 2 pounds of grain-fed steak or I eat 2 pounds of farm-raised salmon, either way, I'm going to be in my bed that night laying like a starfish, feeling like I'm going to die. Like,
really? Okay.
Yeah. So for me, I can't really tolerate the negative things in those foods. Farm salmon can literally have up to like 35% fat, and wild salmon doesn't exceed like 10%. So there's a crazy amount of fat because of how they're feeding the salmon. It's the pollution and the pollutants in fish are more like toxins that damage the liver and are hard to get out of the body. The damaging things that are in beef are more hormonal, estrogen related, and aren't as directly toxic to the body. So there's like 2 different categories of pollutants there that we're concerned about in the environment. Both will destroy and damage your health. It's just the wild caught fish, and it's very hard to source fresh fish. You go to a fishmonger or local fish market. The real issue with fish is the demand isn't there. People don't really eat as much fish as pork, beef, and chicken. I mean, on Frankie's Free Range Meat, we've been trying to get fish for a while, and we want to get quality stuff that's from like a good ocean that's not polluted, and we're having a hard time getting it ourselves. So fish access for most people, very difficult. I will say that, as much as people like salmon, you have fish like mackerel, herring that are very fatty, very high quality, always, always, always wild caught. Like most oysters, mussels, and clams. I mean, shellfish can be an issue, but interestingly enough, there were indigenous people, hunter-gatherers, who only ate shellfish. Their animal protein sources were only shellfish. So in each of these aspects of animal foods, for the most part, whether it's fish or meat, you can have a complete nutrient profile to your diet. Eggs and dairy tended to be supplemental. There were groups of people that consumed large amounts of dairy and small amounts of meat. So bear in mind, if you're getting your nutrition from fish, shellfish, whole animals, the nutrient profile is contained in an animal itself. So if you think about a fish egg or caviar, a fish egg is essentially a tiny fish. So you're getting the whole nutrient profile of the fish in that fish egg. An oyster is one entity. An oyster is one thing. So if you eat that oyster, you're getting the whole nutrient profile of the oyster. You're not exactly shrinking down a cow and eating a cow in one bite. You're eating a steak. And to get the full nutrient profile of a ruminant animal, you'd have to eat the brain, the tongue, the liver, the marrow. You'd have to eat the whole animal. So, eating a whole goat is a better analogy for this, because if you slaughter one goat and you get 40, 50, 60 pounds of meat and you eat that in a month or two, every single part of it, that's where you'll get the complete nutrient profile, as opposed to just buying muscle meat over and over again. Same thing with finned fish. Usually, when you're eating salmon, you're gutting the fish. In a hypothetically ideal scenario, you would be eating the liver, the guts of the fish too, which doesn't happen because they gut the fish on the boat and you can't even get it. So from a practical standpoint, we can kind of use things like eggs, dairy, oysters. Fish eggs are very approachable whole foods that encapsulate the complete nutritional profile. So, although, there are concerns about, food quality and, comparing like grain-fed beef to farm-raised fish, unfortunately, every single one of these foods can be addressed in an individual conversation. And, this is part of the reason why I'm successful with my YouTube channel. I know every single food on an individual basis. Right. And yeah, it's crazy. Like, Frank, how can I do all of that research and understand, oh, wait, what about olive oil? Oh, well, let's have a 10-minute conversation about olive oil. It gets really, really crazy. But, what I try to do is provide basic explanations for things that people can try to apply to other foods. That being said, I still get, hundreds of comments every day. Oh, Frank, is bacon bad for you? And I'm like, well, let's think about, omega fatty acid ratio. It's just, yeah, there's a lot to learn, but the basic advice, increase the amount of quality animal foods in your diet. Take that first step, go from there.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And it's true. It's like, there's a lot to learn, but this is one of those things too. It's like, I always talk about the idea that there's certain things in your life that you should be an expert on. One of them is your diet. One of them is your fitness, and another of them is your finance and wealth, because those are things that affect you every single day of your life. And learning about those things will produce effects for, you can't delegate that to someone else to some degree. So one last thing I wanted to ask you about, and guys, by the way, if you haven't already, make sure that you go and subscribe to Frank's channel, Frank Tufano. We'll put a link. There'll be a link in the cards. There'll be a link in the description below. And go do it now, because you guys obviously have heard Frank talking here, and he knows what he's talking about. He has a lot of information, just a lot of really in-depth. I mean, he gets the whiteboard and he's like going through every single vitamin and exactly, so whether you agree with him or not, like, the science there, you should listen to it. Like, if you're going to disagree with Frank, I'd say that you better come up with the actual arguments, because he's got all that information there. So go check out the channel. Really good stuff. So one last thing I wanted to ask you about, popular book. I read this book, How Not to Die. Have you read that book? What's your opinion?
Yeah.
To me, it's like such a convincing book. But then it's like, I don't know. Like, what do you think?
Okay, so I'll be honest. I haven't read the book. I probably wouldn't have the patience to read the book.
Yeah.
One thing you said was, we need to be an expert on our health, on our finances, on things that affect us every day. Our hunter-gatherer ancestors their job was to procure food. That's what they did. They knew their environment. They knew the food. They knew their health. They knew what to do. They didn't have those other modern aspects and issues. So that's important. But this How Not to Die is a book. It's a plant-based vegan book written by a doctor named Dr. Michael Greger. I call him Dr. String Bean. I refer to him as a ghoul as well.
Yeah, look up pictures, guys. Look at the guy that's giving you the health advice. So
these vegans are incredibly good at twisting everything. So I could do this with anything if I wanted to. So you have this guy, he's vegan, he's a doctor, appeal to authority instantly. Mm-hmm. He has I don't know who's helping this guy, but he has a lot of money and a lot of funding because, you know, the production quality of his videos is absurd. You know, he comes out with videos every day, every week, and this is what he does. And this conversation is addressing the issue with modern epidemiology and modern studies. As crazy as it sounds, epidemiology is not adequate for nutritional studies. This is because of relative risk. This is because of confounding factors.
Epidemiology for.
So epidemiology is pretty much. Let me be correct on this. I don't want to. So epidemiology really just covers anything related to health. Mm-hmm. So when you're saying an epidemiological study, it's basically saying, is it with chronic disease? Is it with improving your health? Is it anything positive or negative? So a better word for it is just health study. Sure. So any study that people are using pertaining to food or pertaining to health is under this branch of epidemiology. They like to make it sound complicated, but it's not. And as we said, there are confounding factors in a person's lifestyle and diet that make it so the relative risk is not adequate. So let me explain these things. Confounding factors are, does the person smoke? Does the person exercise? Is the person in a highly polluted environment? These confounding factors can literally turn a study on its head. And these aren't actually analyzed in the study. They are put in as a model. So, the researchers are able to change the study however they want. So I could have a study that shows that broccoli improves digestion or something. And then if I flip one of these confounding factor variables, it goes in the other direction. Then say, oh, well, people are damaging their gut with broccoli. So the manipulation of models and variables in studies is one reason why epidemiology is not good. The other reason.
So what you're saying there is, just so to make a kind of clear example. So I have this study on broccoli. It shows that broccoli is good for your gut. And then I say, well, you know what? Let's exclude all the people that smoke.
Yeah.
And then see how that changes the study. And it's like, oh, now it says that broccoli is bad for you. Okay, let's keep it that way. Whereas I made that choice. I could have left them in, or I could pick another subgroup and take them out. And then so that I can basically change the results whichever way that I want, or I can modify multiple of those variables in order to say, well, we excluded for this, and that even though it's not actually a component of the actual truth behind the thing, I can manipulate whatever variable of those, what you call them, confounding factors, right, in order to change the actual result, right?
Yeah, it's definitely not that black and white. There's so many of them that, they might be using 9, and just by excluding the 10th one, that might change the study in the favor. So it's not going to be obvious like them just excluding smokers, but you will have, out of the 10, 15 variables they're looking at, there will be a switch. So when you're changing that can alter the study. But most importantly, we have relative risk. And relative risk is a number that gauges the increased risk of whatever you're looking at in the study. So if you're looking at, the increased rate of heart disease from consuming eggs, the relative risk might be like 1.04. Relative risk of 1.04 means a 4% increased risk of heart disease in the context of this study if you're consuming eggs. So first we have to say, okay, this obviously doesn't apply to the general population. But what you have to understand about relative risk is 1.04 is not a 4% increased risk of disease. So let's say the risk of heart disease is 2.1. That means that, okay, now your risk of heart disease is like 2.15. So you're applying it to that, and that's called the absolute risk. So the absolute risk of the disease might be 2%, and then adding 0.04 to it would be a very marginal increase. So these people are using, you have a 30% increased risk for heart disease. In reality, you have like a a 0.5% chance increased risk for heart disease.
Right.
So
And that's not even like that's not even taking into consideration standard deviation. Like if you're talking about that small little increment, then if you did the study 100 times, you might have completely different results within that, because that's a very small band of an increase or decrease in risk, right?
exactly. So the last thing about the relative risk is what you just said. So in most studies in general, if the relative risk isn't over 3, they dismiss it. But 99% of these health studies and nutrition studies are like 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. So any legitimate scientist would just throw them out the window and say it's not a high enough risk. If you look at the risk of cancer like lung cancer, lung disease, and smoking, the relative risk is like 120. And if you try to translate that to like a news title, oh, you have a 10,000% increased chance of skin cancer of cancer if you smoke. So anyways, so that means if you went by relative risk of a study for smoking, that means that everyone smoking should be dead right now. So
Right.
the way they're applying it from nutrition doesn't really make sense. It's unfortunate. And that's why when I look at studies, I look at what's going on in the study. I look at the mechanism. So if I when I was doing research on Candida, I found a study showing that if you consume a large amount of calcium, that can inhibit zinc absorption, which creates an excess of copper, and an excess of copper creates hypergoliath adherent Candida cells. So this is very complicated and kind of out there, but it was just on the top of my head. You're looking at what happens when you do something in the body.
Mm-hmm.
If you consume, like if you let me try to think of another one. So you have something like there's a study where people consumed spinach to try to gauge vitamin K absorption, because vitamin K has different forms. You have the plant form vitamin K1, which is in spinach, and then they gave the people butter with the spinach, and the butter increased the absorption of the vitamin K1. So that's a mechanism we can look at. Okay, why did that happen? Are there synergistic vitamins? So all of the dozens and dozens of studies I look at, whatever's going on, I try to look at the mechanism as opposed to the numbers. Right now, it's the other way around. That's why I'm planning on doing a video on heart disease, explaining how these high omega-6 fats cause oxidative stress in the body. And if you actually understand the metabolic process of how that piece of cholesterol actually gets lodged in your artery, you're not worried about the percentages in the studies. That being said, as we've reiterated many times in this discussion, hard to understand, hard to comprehend. People don't want to buy it as opposed to the general, eating eggs causes heart disease. Well, no. You're feeding the chicken soy and corn, which increases the omega-6, which is causing there to be high levels of linoleic acid in your blood, and that's what's causing the heart. That much more complicated than what people are led to believe. And of course, knowing the truth about health would cause too many people to lose too much money.
Yeah. So many people rely on the advice of their doctors, which most doctors have absolutely no idea about nutrition and very little actually knowledge about health in general, right? They've been taught a certain thing, and we've been taught a certain thing. We've been told to eat breakfast and to eat your fruits and vegetables and all of these things, and doing the research yourself takes work, right? So again, guys, that's why, like I said, go check out Frank's channel, because he's doing that research for you. And like I said, once I started watching his videos, I watch pretty much every video that comes out, because this is the stuff that I don't have the time to research myself. And so finding a good, reliable source that you can trust, where it's unbiased, I think is very important. So all right, guys, that's it. Thanks, Frank. I really appreciate you taking all the time here and answering a lot of my questions. I've been wanting to pick your brain for a while here, so this has been good. Guys, also, we talked about the quality meat. I'm telling you this just as your friend here. I have no deal with Frank about any kind of affiliate deals or commissions. There's nothing going on behind the scenes. I just literally invited Frank on the channel.
We don't have any deals.
Yeah, we have nothing. So go check it out though. Frankie's Free Range Meat. What's the web address for them?
Yeah, you can go to Frankie's. You can go to frankiesfreerangemeat.com.
Mhm.
No one else does what we do. We offer, 5, 10, and 15% flat discounts on certain order sizes. And that's the reason we don't really have any affiliates or have any people we're working with yet in general, because of, I mean, we're barely making money as is. We're trying to get people affordable meat, and we're hoping that the growth, this initial, offering, and this leads to growth in the future. And then we're able to, people are happy, they're getting a deal, they're getting quality meat. And then in the long term, it pays off. We have high customer retention and people are happy.
Yeah. So guys, check it out. Like I said, we're being totally transparent about this. And for those of you that are vegans out there, we don't hate you. We don't hate you. We still love you. It's good. It's good. Just, we're just giving information out. So if you want to stay vegan, do so if you want to, is what I would say. But at your own, at least have the knowledge, right? At least, like, I would say, like, I make a lot of bad choices in my life, but I make them purposefully, right?
Mhm.
Occasionally when I go out and drink, you guys know, I'll have a couple of cigarettes. I agree, it's a bad choice, but I know the science behind it. I know what I'm doing, right? I think, the best thing we can do as human beings is make educated decisions, not to, like, put our heads in the sand. So find out the information. And then if you still decide, hey, you know what, I still want to eat a totally vegan diet, do it, fine. But being ignorant, that's the thing that I try to help you guys on this channel, is make sure you're not ignorant. You can make whatever choice you want, I don't care, but don't be ignorant.